So we're just going to type some really, really basic code just to get started. And the main thing we're going to focus on today is something called functions. Functions in P5, or remember in Scratch when we were making the blocks of code where you could make a little block and you could define some actions and then you could use that block in different places. That's what a function is like in programming in general. It's just like a little block of code that we can use whenever we want. That's the main focus of the lesson, but it's really just an intro. So the first thing that we're going to do, actually, though, is not write a function. The first thing that we're going to do is write something called a comment. A comment is something that's not part of the code, but it gives us some information about how the program works. So we actually had comments in Scratch. We would add them as a little like note card on the side of the code. So this is the same thing, but it just has a specific syntax. So this isn't part of the program. It's something that we write as a note to either ourselves or to somebody that we're working with who's also writing code that explains what the code is doing. So there's two ways to write a comment, and almost every program that you ever write should start with a comment that says what the program is. So one way to write a comment is just using 2 slashes like this. Let me increase it a little bit more. So this is just 2 forward slashes. This is where the question mark key is, but you hold shift. And this starts a comment. So this is a single line comment. So you can just type anything you want after this. And this is useful for adding inside of your code because it just takes up 1 line. It's very quick. You can add it at the end of a line of code. You can add it at the beginning of the line of code. It's just a really quick way to write a little note that is not part of your code. Another way to write a comment that takes up more space is called a multi-line comment. This looks like this. You put a slash and then an asterisk, and then anything that you write after this, including line breaks, will be part of a multi-line comment. I accidentally added 2 things. It's just 1. So I'm going to hit the tab key to move over a little bit. This is another thing we do a lot in programming is we indent our text over when we're writing stuff to make it clear that anything that's indented is part of this like one section. This is just a convention for readability. It makes it easier to see the different parts of the program. It doesn't actually change the way that the code works. So I'm going to say this is a multi-line comment. And most programs start with a big comment like this where you will put like, the author of the program, the name of the program, some information about it. So for this comment, I'm going to say this is just a P5 intro by Owen. And I might put the date. It's like October 28th, 2024. And you could put any other information that might be relevant to somebody who's reading this code to explain, what we're looking at. So I'm going to put just another note. We're going to, this is for a lesson on P5 functions and shapes. That's what we're going to be focusing on. So when we're done with this comment, we put another asterisk. Whoops, this needs to go down here. We need to put another asterisk and another forward slash like that. And then I'll move it back like that. And if you do the tidy code, like you'll see if I put these guys over here like this, and I do tidy code, oh, it actually doesn't affect my comment. Okay, never mind. So with the comments, the tidy code isn't going to do anything, but it's still good to do these indentations just to make it easier to read. And then another thing that's nice about the editor and most text editors is it's hard to see, but there's a little triangle right here. And if I click on that, it collapses that section of the code. So I can collapse different parts of my code to make it easier to see which part I'm focusing on. So you can see when I collapse, this is line 2, and the comment goes to line 8. So when I collapse this section, now it skips from line 2 to line 9. So when we write different sections of code, if we indent our text correctly, then we can we can collapse those sections using that caret button. Okay, so let's write a function. This isn't going to be a P5 function. This is just going to be a example function. Any questions so far? Okay, so when I want to write a function, I want to create it like a new part of my code. And in JavaScript, most of our code is organized into different functions. So the different functions are like those blocks where we write a bunch of code that we want to use, and we give it a name so that we can use it in different places. I'm going to write an example function. So I'm going to start with a comment. I usually start with a comment to explain what you're about to see. So I'll say this is an example function. So when I want to write an example function, I start with the keyword function. So you can see when I write function at the beginning of a line here, it's yellow. Or if you're in a different theme, it may be a different color. In this case, it's actually kind of hard to see. It's kind of like a weird brown color. But you can see that our text editor highlights this part because it sees it as something slightly different than the rest of our text. All of this text is just gray because it's just a comment, but the function is yellow because our text editor knows that the word function has this like really specific meaning, which is we're about to create a function, a block of code. So let's give this function a name. And when you create a function, you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter what you name it, but it's good to use descriptive names. So you can really call it anything. You could call it banana, but you want to give it a name that explains what it's going to be used for. So I'm going to call this function. I'm just going to call it print, or let's just call this function. What am I going to do with this? I'm just going to print some numbers. So actually, I'm just going to call this example function because that's what its main purpose is. So I'm going to call it example and then function. Okay, so let's collapse this and focus on this. So a couple things to point out here. Notice that when I name a function, I did something a little weird, which is that I capitalized the second word in the function name. So functions don't have to have two words. But if they do, in JavaScript, there's different conventions in different languages. But in JavaScript, what we do is we capitalize the second word so that we can see that they're two different words. So the first word in a function in JavaScript is usually a lowercase letter. It can be any letter. It can't be a number, although you can use numbers later, but don't worry about that. So we always start with a lowercase letter. And then if we have multiple words in the function name, we use a capital letter. This is called camel case because it's like a hump in a camel. You can't use spaces. The reason we do that is you can't use a space like this because that tells the program that this is a new thing. So in programming, each like piece of text is a different thing. The function word, that's a keyword that says we're creating a function. And then the next thing that we write has to be the name of the function. It can't be like a space. It can't be a number. It has to be the name of the function, so we can't use a space here. So that's why we use a capital F. Okay, so the next thing that we have in a function is a parentheses like this, open and closed. We're not going to put anything in here for now. We will in a minute. But for now, we'll just add that in. That's just the way that we know this is a function. The parentheses in a minute we're going to use to add in numbers that change the way that the function works. But for now, we're just going to leave it like that. Okay, next we add in curly brackets. So the curly brackets are where we actually define the lines of code in the function. The curly brackets are next to the P key on the keyboard. You can see the two bracket keys. And you have to hit shift, or wait, do you have to hit shift? I always forget. Yeah, you have to hit shift to get the curly bracket part. Okay, this is everything that we need to do to start creating a function. Once you have up to here, normally what you do is you hit enter in between those curly brackets, and now you have what's called a function scope. This is the inside of the function where we can say what we want it to do. So this is our function scope. So here we define the steps of the function. And so inside our function, we just are going to do some code. And whenever we call the function, that code will run. And one of the nice things about the editor is if you click on this curly bracket, it'll highlight the curly bracket that it connects to. So it's easy to see where the function starts and ends. And if you accidentally add an extra curly bracket, when you click here, it turns red. So that if it's red when you click next to it, that means that you don't have a matching curly bracket, which means that your code has probably an error. Okay, so let's actually do something with this function. So earlier, I mentioned this thing called the console. The console is something that developers use to test their code, and it'll print out errors if we write an error in the code. But we can also print out messages there to test that our code is running or to check if the number is right or do different things. And so the way that we use the console, there's another keyword that's just console. And if we say console dot, so in JavaScript, we'll use this more in the future, but sometimes you have collections of functions and they're organized into one thing, and we use the dot to access those. So if we say console.log, notice log is blue because it's a function. Oh, I didn't actually mention, see that once we write the function name, that's highlighted blue. P5 knows that this is a function. So we're going to console.log, and we're just going to put a number here just because it's the easiest thing to log. I'm just going to put 1, and we'll see that show up in the console. At the end of our line of code, we just put a semicolon like this. That just says that this line of code is done. So semicolons go at the end of statements. We'll go over this a little bit more in a moment. But we don't need semicolons on this line because we're declaring the beginning of a function, or this line where the function ends. We just need a semicolon here. So I'll put a note here. So we're going to print a number to the console. Okay, so now if we run this code, something's actually going to happen. And actually, normally what we do is, well, actually, let's get to that in a second. So actually, we're not quite at the point where this code will do anything. So if you hit play right now, you might expect the number 1 to appear in the console, but it actually doesn't yet. We're not quite there. We're almost there. So this is a function declaration. So let's put another note here. So a function declaration is just declaring that the function exists. I'm going to bring up Scratch real quick just to... it looks like the Scratch website is actually just not working. So let me try this in an incognito window just to make sure. Yeah. Okay. So let me just draw what this would look like in Scratch. Hopefully you guys will remember. I have my little tablet today because I'm going to draw a couple things. So in Scratch, when we used a block, remember we had like a block for animation. So it would make this like little block like this and call it animation. And then we would put like a bunch of stuff in here to control the animation. And then we would get a block like this that is also says animation that we can connect to different events in Scratch. So in this case, this is like the declaration or definition of the function. And this is using the function. Sometimes that's called calling or invoking. There's different words for this that get used in different contexts, but those are the main terms. So now we're going to use the function. This is also called calling or invoking. So to use the function, we actually just write the function name again. That's all we do. We just say example function. So now our program will actually do something. And notice that I have a semicolon at the end of this statement because it is a statement of code. So now if I run this code, you're going to see there's a 1 right there. And so we can see our code actually works. So I'm going to make one change to this, and then we'll take a break and make sure everybody's got at least this part working. Okay. So earlier I talked about these parentheses. The parentheses are where we can add what's called an argument. The argument is something that changes what happens in the function. We're going to use, the reason I'm going over this now, sometimes we would wait, like if this was a computer science class, we wouldn't go over this for like a couple weeks, but we're actually going to be using this a lot in our lesson today. So I'm going over it now. So let's say we wanted to log different numbers. I can put what's called a variable in here that changes the number that comes out. So we use variables in Scratch. Remember, we had like a score or we had like a timer and the number would change. We can do the same thing here. So I'm just going to use a shorthand for this. I'm just going to use NUM for number. And now instead of logging the number 1, I'm going to log whatever number we put in our arguments. So now if I put the number 2 here, this number 2 is going to get passed into this num argument. And so that's what will come out of the console. So if we run this code, you see we get that 2 out of the console. And the nice thing about using an argument is we can change the number. So that allows us to do different things with the same function. So I'm going to say example function, and this time I'm going to log 100. And you can see it's going to log 2, and then it logs 100. And, I can do this as many times as I want. Or I can not do it, although there's no reason to make a function that I don't use. So I could also do some math in here. If I want to, I could say like 1 plus 1, and that's also going to be 2. And we'll look at other examples of math that we can do in a minute. But yeah, that's the basic idea of a function. Those are all, well, not all, but those are the main components that we're going to be working with today. So I'm going to take another break here, and we'll check in and make sure everybody's got that working. And then we're actually going to do some drawing after this. And I'm going to change the name of this to P5 Intro Functions because I'm going to make another sketch for the next part.